Every CISO seems to be stuck in the same loop with AI. Every department wants it, but the security risks are real. If you lock it down too much, you can cripple the business ability to capitalize on this incredible technology. If you move too fast, you could expose the business to threats you can't even see yet. So how do you strike that balance? In this episode, we're talking about how CISOs can unlock AI's full potential without exposing the business to unnecessary risk. Let's get into it.
AI. It has been on the top billing of almost every single security conference, podcast like ours, although ours is special. I'll call out. But at the end of the day, you know what most of what I'm seeing out in the field and looking at various message boards and communities and networks and everything else, it's AI is creating some level of tension, right? It's available at the very least now that we've seen from commercials that are happening on at the Super Bowl, all the way to what we're seeing in popular media, maybe not as much as some of those movies clips that we've seen in the past year, but it's accessible now. It's tangible. It's something that we're seeing from the boardroom to the mailroom. Everyone, for the most part, if they haven't tried ChatGPT, whether they're using it as a Google search or using it to create something, it's something that's present. And a lot of CISOs that I've been talking to, at the very least, have suggested that there is this tension. The board wants it. Now, it being very nebulous, right? Because we have different types of AI that's out there, right? We have the chatbots and the co-pilots of the world, like, ChatGPT and Claude and Copilot for 365. Then we have these new AI agents. I mean, look at Matthew McConaughey is a big spokesman now for Salesforce AI Agent Force. And then we have the infrastructure, right? Most of the organizations, too, that are a little bit more on their maturity model get to a position of, we see what the commercial off-the-shelf capabilities are, but we need to build our own LLMs. So now you've got this whole litany of AI infrastructure that exists. To me, AI equals data no matter which way you look at it. Data, is absolutely necessary for AI. But when it really comes down to the speed in which that organizations are wanting to implement AI and all of the various machinations, and we can pick an avenue if we really need to kind of narrow this conversation. But the biggest issue is that we are here at another innovative crux of security leaders are either going to say no, or they're going to enable the business and hopefully enable the business in a way that's not going to usher in this next evolution of risks that need to be mitigated very quickly or end up in security incidents.
Sure. Yeah. No, there is a lot of, like you said, conversation, a lot of density and appetite for the technology. The one thing that I'm a bit skeptical of is my conversations with folks is they want it, and then you peel back the onion a bit, but they want it for the sake of wanting it. It's like, when you start thinking about AI and you start thinking about, like you said, agents and just a whole host of technology that you could implement to streamline something, a lot of cases, AI is probably not the right fit. So really having a clear idea of what areas do you believe you can get high fidelity, high accuracy for a model to do some actions, and then other areas where just it's better left to just wait for maturity or wait for some breakthrough. So I'm not saying that security should hinder this technology. We should embrace it and use it as a force multiplier, and augment in any way that we can. But the blanket statement of I want something without having really clear understanding of what exactly that means, I think will get folks, number one is it'll hinder your strategic roadmap. So you're going to implement something and may not get the outcome that you want at the expense of something else. So I just caution folks, not saying don't do it, just be super mindful and super targeted around exactly what areas you really think you'll see tangible, repeatable, high accuracy outcomes. And that's
no doubt.
And I don't know if you're seeing that as well, but that's been my kind of sense and what I've seen.
I've heard a variety of stories, and I think that there's been this paradigm shift too of the I need it, I want it, and it being this, again, nebulous term. There was a CTO we were sitting down and having a conversation with, and he had the quote of what I called quote of the year. But he said, we have this AI initiative. We don't necessarily know what we're going to get out of it. We've got every tool out there. We're testing it. We're in pilot mode. We are innovating at the speed of crap. And, the whole room started to laugh about this. But now, as time has gone on, right now there's this more pragmatic approach because we've got marketing and the hype cycle and the tools du jour and everything that's coming out that now we're seeing, okay, we have a steering committee. We have a governance committee. We have a, some type of leadership combination here that we have at least a need. And let's see, like you said, does AI fit this need, or is there just another function? Some of these things that are just embedded in systems, I think they're going to be great, right? If there's platforms out there that you don't need to do these routine manual tasks like building specialized reports or, maybe responding to first line incidents or, something that's more on the level one side of the house, I think that's just part and parcel with where software is going to go. It's going to implement these features just for quality of life and to get more use out of it. But when we start really getting into the idea of AI, where data is going to drive decisions, it's going to have innovation, it's going to be able to react with us as customers or provide some service, then I think it needs to be very defined with very distinct outcomes that have been, measured and can be monitored. And then there's all the other things and the risks that come into it. But, it's this, where do we start? And where we started from this, we just want it to now we've got steering committees, I think is a positive direction.
It is. And just one thing I wanted to dive into a bit more, and I've asked this question a number of times to folks, and I can't say that I have a clear answer for myself either. But anytime if you don't measure something, my opinion is you shouldn't do it. So when you talk about AI systems or leveraging AI for something, particularly on the security side, or let's just say in the organization, I'm more attracted to and want to understand from an organization standpoint or from the initiative standpoint, like how are you measuring how well this is going to execute? What exactly tangible outcome you're gaining from it? And what I'm finding and what have come across is folks don't have an idea. So that seems odd to me. And then you ask yourself, at least me, ask the next logical questions. Well, why do we want it? Right? And then you say, well, you look around and everyone's doing it, and it's what is it, FOMO, fear, right? And we're missing out on something. So there is a level of, I think, being practical. And depending on your organization, the skill sets that you have, the budget that you have, it's okay to say, well, we're open to it and we love to implement it, but we're going to do it in a more methodical or have a more methodical approach to how we embrace it. And that, I think there's a fear to say that to some extent because folks may not want to look like we're not diving headfirst into it. And my statement isn't saying you shouldn't dive headfirst into it. My statement is it's okay to say we want it, we love to implement it, but let's just be super cautious of what use cases we go after. I'm a proponent of that because I just haven't seen any really good metric outside of the training side of it, right? I think when you're training a model, there are actually really good benchmarks that you can target for. Most companies aren't training it. And so when you talk about the inference side and you talk about like applying it to something, right? That's where you start getting into how well is the measurements and stuff. So yeah, I think that's an excellent point you highlighted. It's spot on actually. And I would tell any CISO or any leader listening, be mindful of that and make that a central focus in terms of how you're looking to bring it to your organization.
Right. Yeah, but at the same time, it's like you said, FOMO. I don't know if it's so much FOMO, but if we think about competition And we have to assume our competition is taking advantage of the latest innovations that are out there. And in a lot of cases now, this is something that is, you want to advertise that, AI is enabling this business or whatever the case may be. It's strategic advantage, whether it's, productivity gains or innovation. The biggest thing is how do you balance, right? And I think that's the premise of this as we're talking to security audiences, balancing the need from the business and the need for security to not have self-inflicted risk, especially when we're talking about things like data. And we have, I go back to think about conversations that I've had that, do I want my personal information, my social security number, my credit card number, my bank balances, my, last 12 years addresses, consumer credit reports, those types of things, ending up in a model that someone could potentially either go and make a decision on me. Maybe there's some positivity there, or have some interaction that I could go pull from. Or if they're trying to innovate, what good is a social security number when it could be, for instance, and I'm just using this as a very high level position, but like data that could be tokenized or obfuscated, or it's just not needed to go into the corpus. And so it's just, there's so many layers to that. So if you were looking at, that balance, right? So we're talking about innovation that we need, security that we need. Who would be your core leaders in the organization that you would pull in?
So, who would I pull in to spearhead or work towards bringing AI or using it safely within the organization? So, when I think about it, number one is obviously the risk and compliance teams, right? From a security standpoint, it's important to have them to make sure that we enforce AI controls, map to any regulatory, requirements that we have, and then like mitigate any legal risks, right? So the GRC folks, obviously the AI and data teams, right? To think about like how we exactly are integrating AI into our development lifecycle, or where are we using it, right? And then to ensure that it's done securely, and then ethically as well, right? There's this whole study around the ethics around AI. So that's where I think the data teams and the AI teams could would need to bring in legal and the policy folks, right? So it's such a new field. So we don't know ultimately what the regulatory landscape will be. I mean, DeepSeek was released a month ago, and like look at how much changed from the time that it was released till now. And so the rate in which it's changing, I always tell my teams that the hardest thing to do is catch a moving target, right? So I think what the compliance frameworks will be, it's moving, and it's moving really fast. So obviously the legal folks, and then obviously the board of leadership, right, making sure that they're in tuned in terms of the areas that we're going to implement AI and leverage it. And so I think that those would be like the four big pillars of the folks that I would have part of the conversation. And then I think where the CISO can play a strategic role is like play that connective tissue across all of them, right? Obviously GRC would be a team from within your organization, but yet being the interface across all of these, because you're correct. The appetite is there. Organizations want it, and I'm not saying we shouldn't go out and get it. So we have to enable it, and we should be great partners to facilitate the use of it. But obviously, there are places where we should be mindful, be methodical, measure, and all that. But we definitely should embrace it. I don't think that any security team worth anything are ones that say like, "Oh no, we shouldn't do it." I mean, but what's that old saying?
Yeah, the unfortunate reality is how often that actually does exist, and the name that security practitioners and teams have just generally, gotten that badge heavy notoriety of, we're just stopping this and stopping that. I honestly think that at this point in time, if we really think at how, CIOs have transitioned into strategic leaders, this could very well become a scenario where security, might be viewed as that strategic enabler. this is a massive innovation that's going to change the business. This has an opportunity when you start looking at all the various tools that are out there, and if you're lucky enough or well suited enough with the right personnel to build your own models and start to see, where these gains. And of course, across those four, teams that you talked about, I would also say business leadership and all the various areas of operations, because they're going to see the AI outcomes very differently. But then you at least have, a mechanism of review to say, okay, does this meet company initiative? Does this meet design? Do we have the capability and the economies to support it, et cetera, et cetera. But it's very good topic today when we think about the last major evolution in technology was probably, and maybe I'm incorrect, but my own opinion, .com. This is going back 20 some years. There's been some major gains with software and technology and compute power and storage and all kinds in cloud. But even cloud, for that matter, it's again less of a nebulous term today than it was. But the biggest position on where innovation and where changes can occur, I do think that AI has more of a capability today, and as a result, more impact on an organization on what you can actually get out of it versus, just, shifting some workloads or workflows to different organizations that have better technology to get you more detail or faster process and performance, those types of things, very generically stated. So that being said, right, everything, when we think about new innovations, new technologies coming in, we've got to align, some security stack to it, some model. So when you think about how you would apply that in your organization or any organization for that matter, what would you suggest?
Yeah, so this is great question, Scott, because I think now we get to the brass tacks of it all. Okay, we all agree that there's some facet of function that AI will play in the growth of every company. And now on the security standpoint, what are some areas that we believe today that we should have focus on? So let's break it. And again, ask me 6 months from now, this could be different as we learn more. But today there'd be 3 areas that I think that we would agree that there needs to be the tooling portion of it, the controls, and then our security monitoring capabilities, right? So the first area, let's talk about that, right? So how the tooling, exactly the development of the solution within your stack, right? So no different than any application security, exactly how is the code being developed to leverage this technology, right? So that'll be under the tooling bucket, adversarial testing, right? Making sure that you have that in place. This one is a big one. Choosing the model itself. Most organizations, the reality of that, they'll never train their own model. So what model are you using and why? And help to identify the vulnerabilities in which that model, the vulnerability within the data that was used for that model. And then the model behavior. What use case are you using that model for? Is it in fact yielding the results that you are expecting, right? And then the next piece of it. So that would be the tooling aspect of it. The second area would be the data protection and the controls, right? Now, we all know that the LLMs require a lot of data to be trained, right? So okay. So making sure that if in fact there is a training component to it, are we enforcing these good security practices of least enforcement access, right? So the model isn't spitting out responses from sensitive data that the user who's requesting the information isn't privy to. That's important. The encryption of the data. We talk about the models. There's so much focus on the model, but again, the encryption of the data, making sure that's in place is super important. Obviously, RBAC, right? Making sure, I highlighted that a little bit in terms of the least privilege, but it's so important. Those principles will not change in this AI domain. And then I didn't really like this term when it first came out, but I'm a firm believer in the zero trust techniques. Again, applying this to the control of the data and the access of the data. So that would be the data protection and the access control portions of it. And then the last piece, the last area would be detection and monitoring of, right? So, like how do you detect like model drift? Are we detecting bias exploitations, data poisoning attempts? So there's all these things that I think from a security monitoring and detection piece that is very important, and for security leaders to be thinking about when the organization does decide to embrace the tech. So again, just summarizing, obviously the tooling, how it's built, what controls we have in place, right? How it's used, and then lastly, just the monitoring capabilities that we have in place to ensure that the model is in fact functioning the way that we expect over time, and it doesn't introduce an additional risk. But I think that's important. And like I said, maybe 6 months from now, there's more areas, but there's a host of frameworks, and I just want to share this for the audience. There's some frameworks that I think that are available that I think would be useful for our audience. Like the EU AI Act has a lot of good stuff in there. NIST has an AI risk framework. So these are a couple that I just mentioned that I found to be very useful. Anthropic has a whole research section that they share a lot of security articles and research on. I find that to be so useful. So again, these three main buckets, but I just, as we said earlier, the legal framework, and the compliance is changing so fast, but so we'll see how things morph over time, but absolutely embrace it, and if you can, do it securely.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more, Aftab. When it really comes down to it, I think that the biggest highlight that AI has really brought to light is focus on data.
Yeah.
What you have, who and what has access to it, and how any of those identities are utilizing it. This is everything. This is what separates where does risk come in to where are we mitigating it properly. And a lot of times, and unfortunately, data governance and the function of that least privilege access, which seems to be a very academic term, has become something that we need to embrace and make sure is in play today. Yeah. And always monitoring that data and how it's being used, because this is where we start to identify, and especially even use AI, right? We can use that functionality to really identify those abnormal patterns and some of these new threat vectors that are out there, like you talk about with the poisoning and the bias. So lot to cover here, and I'm sure that this is just the infancy of what we're seeing.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot that we'll learn, and I'm excited about it. I think it's a fantastic time to be in this space. A little scary, but you embrace the being uncomfortable.
That's it.
Absolutely.
All right. In this next segment, we're playing do or don't. We'll go back and forth, prompting each other with a few different AI scenarios. One of us will throw out a scenario, and the other has to say if it's a do or a don't. Let's get into it.
Your marketing and legal teams want to use ChatGPT Enterprise and Copilot for Microsoft 365 to speed up their workflows, including drafting contracts and internal reports. The tools are not connected to your data, but they process internal discussions and strategic documents. Should the CISO greenlight the use of AI chatbots for sensitive but non-classified work, or does this open the door to unforeseen compliance and data leakage risks? Do or don't?
Do. I mean, in this rate, kind of that point, do with the caveat of you've got that framework and those steering committees and you understand what risk that you have. When it really comes down to it, the at least from what I understand of the ChatGPT's Enterprise and the Copilots for Microsoft 365, is if you're talking about they're not tied into your data and we're using them more as a productivity gain, understand where that data is going. I don't think that any organization specifically has the ability on a chatbot side until we start getting into more AI, DLP, prompt injection type of functions that they're going to be able to ensure that sensitive but not classified. It's very distinct and specific, and that taxonomy is there. But you're starting small. If you have a scenario that meets your risk framework, if you know that the benefits and the gains are there, you understand what the risk is, you've got good training, this is an area that I'm going to suggest that you do. Okay. And you support it. And this is a great place to start and understand Where are the gains going to be? All right, my friend, you are up next in Do or Don't. All right, so your engineering team wants to leverage AI generated code from GitHub Copilot to speed up development. The code will be automatically integrated into production systems without manual review, but only for low-risk internal applications. Should the CISO allow AI-generated code to go live without human oversight, trusting safeguards and training data, or mandate manual review that slows down development? Do or don't?
I think a couple of things that I have a point there, right? So I do acknowledge that there could be potential risk here, but it's an internal application, and I think that there are ways to mitigate some of the risk to allow this to happen. And I do believe, having seen some of the code assistance AI system IDEs, that the amount of gain that we'll gain from doing this out from a business perspective will outreach the risk that it would introduce. And because this is this is highlighting an internal system, I'd be fine with moving forward with it. Now, granted, I would want put some security things in place. And there are some techniques that we can use to help mitigate some potential risks that wouldn't require humans oversight or review. So I'm all in for this one, Scott. I think we should absolutely greenlight this and support this initiative and be a force multiplier here.
Yeah, your response kind of shocked me. I thought for sure when I was sitting here and looking at even though it's an internal application, no manual review, just pulling in some AI generated code, I thought that you would have been like, all right, this has nothing to do with AI. This is bad process. But I like you at the very least had that net that caught you in regard to there's other things that could be done from dynamic scanning and safeguards that I'll let you off the hook on that one.
Look, we're in security. We're cautious by nature, but I think that you always have to understand that what's important is enabling the business, and we talk about this more, all the time. And so we have to come over our own biases to ensure that we are trying to enable the business in a secure fashion. And so in this instance, this highlights exactly that theme or that philosophical belief. So. Am I saying
it's fair?
Am I 100% comfortable with the statement you make? No. Is there risk?
Comfortable enough.
Comfortable enough and confident enough that we can mitigate stuff without human review, right? So but I like these challenges, these problems. These get me fired up, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
All right, here's the next one. Scott, good luck, man. Your company is considering deploying an AI-driven insider threat detection system that monitors email, Slack messages, keystrokes, and even tone of voice on calls. It flags risky behavior based on sentiment analysis and behavior anomalies. Should the CISO approve an AI that could catch serious internal threats early, but also invade employee privacy and create a culture of surveillance? Do or don't?
Wow, I'm full systems go on this one.
Really?
I think that so here's the reason why.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, insider risk is a very, very real thing. The way that this is going to be identified and used would have to be tuned and tested up front. At the end of the day, to have tools or a first line of defense of some AI that's going to be able to flag and say, hey, something may be amiss here. We've got some of the visual characteristics that we could identify, someone's change of behavior, change in look, their general sense of behavior within the organization is good. I think if it's used in the right way. My fear with this, and the only reason that I would say no, is because of that culture, the big brother. Big brother is watching in a lot of cases, in a lot of organizations, in a variety of different ways. And sometimes it is human interaction. But if this tool is a tool in a box that would give some indicator of compromise, that could build this out in a way that wouldn't break down the trust of org to employee, then I'm saying go with it, because I would much rather have something help me with those constraints than continue flying blind with data being exfiltrated out of the organization, or some corporate espionage or sabotage or whatever the case may be. If used in the right way and not exacerbated or exploited by the person behind the machine, I'm going.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. The keystrokes monitoring kind of freaked me out a bit, but
Yeah, it's, it is, there is something to be said. But again, if we're looking at this in the context of human readable all the time, or just somebody saying, hey, this combination and the strength of the system could come out at the end of the day. I look at it as most organizations provide you a work, endpoint. And if you're doing your personal business on that work endpoint, especially in the day and age of having a computer in your pocket,
Yes.
If this were 25 years ago where life was very different, then maybe. But I think in this context, that system, it should be maintained for work and work only. And those types of conversations, you've got other alternatives and avenues to go that way.
Sure.
So,
Okay, fair enough.
last and final,
Okay,
do or don't, Aftab.
all right. Let's see.
So, here you go, man. Your red team proposes using AI-powered penetration testing tools that can autonomously generate attack strategies based on your real infrastructure. The AI could uncover vulnerabilities faster than humans, of course, but it might also introduce some new risks, like escalating attacks beyond intended limits. Should the CISO deploy the AI to simulate advanced cyber attacks, or does the potential loss of control and unforeseen consequences outweigh the benefits? Do or don't?
I'm going to be a don't here, and I think I'm a don't only because I believe you can use AI to augment your program, but to completely give it full reign, it's not. I haven't seen a system, or I haven't seen an implementation that would justify or have a high level of confidence that it would be able to execute this without any level of oversight. So that causes a bit of pause for me, and I think that it's okay to, like I mentioned, that to augment the program, to speed things up, to create a level of efficiency. But ultimately, I still would like someone, a team member in this scenario, to have the final green button, so to speak, or give it the final go. Now, if it's in a contained environment, if it's within a contained area, something like that, that's a different conversation. But in the way that this scenario is laid out, I would have my reservations. And I would probably push back a bit and ask for a little more oversight.
So when we put it all together, it seems to have to have the do with some pretty significant caveats to a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And I think that really just points out the infancy of where AI is today and how organizations can use it, because there certainly is a ton of benefit. Mm-hmm. But right? There's a lot of those statements that need to be thrown out there.
And just to close, right? Just because from a security we're paid to be security practitioners, and we're paid to highlight, or we're asked to highlight risk from a security perspective. There's nothing wrong with saying, okay, thank you, we appreciate it, but we're still going to do something. Our job, we're not the final sayer in a lot of these, but we have a duty to highlight and share with our concerns, with very well understanding that, okay, we shared that we shouldn't move forward, or we should have some controls in place. If the business wants to move forward otherwise, then we find a way to still support them, right? So just because, like I said, we may push back on a few, still doesn't mean that the business won't do it, or in some cases shouldn't.
Threat actors are using AI to bypass traditional security measures, and static rules aren't enough. Varonis leverages AI and behavioral analytics to spot the subtle signs of an attack before damage is done, whether it's an insider threat, compromised credentials, or ransomware. By understanding normal behavior, Varonis detects real risks without drowning security teams in false positives. Just security that works, so you can stay ahead. See it for yourself. Visit Varonis.com and book a demo today.
On January 23rd, 2025, the White House issued an executive order on AI, removing existing AI regulations to accelerate innovation. The order directs federal agencies to review and roll back policies that could slow AI development, shifting responsibility for AI governance away from the government and onto private companies. Since we're focused on AI in this episode, we're going to talk about what this executive order means for security leaders. If you're a CISO, what should you be doing in response to this policy shift? Scott and I obviously don't have all the answers, but this topic is worth the conversation.
So in this world, when you're talking to CISOs, and you're pretty heavy into this world of governance and compliance, and I applaud you for that. And when you see things like this, what's your advice? What's your advice for other CISOs? What is your general gut reaction to it?
Yeah. And I don't know if I'm right or if I have, but I always think about, like, are we doing the right things for the right reasons with the right intentions, right? And I think that if all three of those things are true, and when it comes to AI and this executive order, as I do believe that there are guardrails that any new technology should have in place. I mean, we saw kind of what happened with users' personal data and like what the social media companies were doing with it, and then we learned, and then we got the user privacy stuff, and so we learned that there's a place for it. But I think today, given we're almost at an arms race as a nation, to try to accelerate and be the first in doing certain things in AI. So I think that anything that prevents us from getting there, we should have a hard look at to see that isn't in fact any constraints or any kind of legislation that we put into place isn't in fact achieving the outcome that it was meant to be. Because if you are going to put some hindrance in place, you better we want to ensure that we're accurate and crystal clear and have a line of sight between the constraint and the outcome we want, versus putting some constraints in place. It hinders our ability to innovate, and then we find ourselves in probably a bigger problem because our models aren't growing are good enough. Organizations aren't innovating fast enough, and then we our ability to compete in some way, shape, or form is hindered. So again, not necessarily having the right answer, but I do think that where we are, we should try to support and allow and see that our legislation or any type of control that we put in place supports and pushes this technology forward.
So you're seeing this as like a precedent, right? Like this is a position that our U.S. government is saying, please, organizations, U.S. domiciled, put your best and brightest at this. Let's get to the forefront and ahead. There's always going to be this country or regional based competition that exists, but you see this supporting the movement forward one way or the other.
I do, because you think about like each you look at history and there's like industrial revolution, and we talk about like the automotive industry, you have to talk about tech, like these fundamental shifts that set a society or that allows for our economy to grow and is the driver for that. I do think, and I do see that this being that type of technology. I mean, some of the folks that I respect a lot in this space I'll share that, right? Like, the Andreessen Horowitz of the world, these top VC firms, like, they've all come out and said like they haven't seen technology this transformative as this. So if we all acknowledge that, and then we all acknowledge and have seen from history what being able to have this transformative technology be at the forefront, why would we then try to hinder it? And so from a practical standpoint, I think that we should do all that we can to support it. That doesn't mean completely not putting any controls in place, or I wouldn't go as far as to say that we shouldn't do anything in terms of regulation or compliance or controls. But I do think we should start from the premise of this is transformative. This can be a force multiplier, a super driver for growth and for innovation. And with those two at the forefront, now what controls or what things should we put into place to ensure the safety, to ensure all the things that are important when you talk about this level of technology. Because fast forward some level of maturity, right, Scott? I mean, these things are going to get these AI. I mean, Anthropic did a paper about, and I won't go too much into this, but there was a paper Anthropic did in terms of they did a study where they took participants and they were trying to convince them of a position, right? So you're saying here's a position. And then they took 50 humans, and they took an AI system, and they wrote a for or against paper or an argument against the position. And like the older models had a rate that was far lower than humans in terms of their ability to convince human beings to come on their side of the issue. Well, the newer models actually do better than humans. So the reason I highlight that is there come a point in time where the models will reach a point where we want to ensure that we have the mechanisms to put some level of control into place to ensure that, life as we know it isn't quote unquote interrupted. But the innovation phase, I think we should support it. I think it's, there's a lot of benefit that will come from it. There's a lot of value that will be created for it. There's a lot of, struggles and burdens that it can alleviate for humanity. So, it's tough. And I think that over time we're going to learn a lot more, but this will be my stance as the information that I know today.
The biggest thing that I see with this is any type of regulation. How does this help or hurt or hinder or affect that CISO? When you're in an organization, where are the levers that are going to get pulled? And I think, as you pointed out, we're gonna learn more in 6 months, in 12 months from now than where we sit today. But it's a very interesting perspective on right now from a precedent where we need to go.
I agree, and we're such at the early stages of it, and I think there's going to be a lot that'll get fleshed out, and a lot that we'll learn. But I think that we will hit an inflection point where some of these decisions will have actual, tangible, real human effect. All right, Scott, cool. Well, fascinating conversation. Well, man, so what's next? We want to make the CISO circle every CISO's favorite corner of the internet. How do we do that? By creating a space for you to tell us exactly what's working and what's not. If you go to thecisocircle.com and scroll down past the content, you'll see a link to take a short listener survey. It'll take you less than 2 minutes, and it will help us make this show more and more helpful for security leaders like you. So head over to thecisocircle.com and give us your 2 cents. We can't wait to hear from you.
In this segment, we're playing Trust or Bust. We'll go back and forth with a prompt. The other host will say trust if they like it, or bust if they don't. And then they have to defend their take. Let's get into it. So first up, AI-driven SOCs will replace Tier 1 security analyst. Trust or bust?
Trust. I mean, it's a difficult problem to ultimately solve. The level of accuracy of its system, the variety of alerts, the decisions that need to be made, but ultimately, I believe this will happen. The Tier 1 SOC analysts will be fundamentally doing a different role. I think it's at some point due to AI. All right, next up, hardening back to an earlier conversation, regulators will eventually require companies to disclose AI-driven security decisions. Trust or bust?
I'm going to go with trust. Now they're going to try their hardest. How effective they'll be, that's a different conversation, a different question. But I think absolutely this is in a regulatory capacity.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So the next one, AI should decide and enforce least privileged access in organizations.
You trust it. Trust it. I love this. I think the identity area is ripening for a really high accuracy system. I mean, there's just a mountain of data. So I absolutely think this is a trust. I love it. All right, Scott, last one, man. CISOs should be responsible for AI governance, not the CIO.
I'm just going to say bust because I don't think that this is a single person's domain and job. We talked so much about the steering committees and the different teams and the groups that need to get involved. If this gets limited to a single role in an organization, it's just set up to fail. There's too much. So I'm going to go with bust here.
Burnout isn't just a buzzword for CISOs. It's reality. Endless incidents, boardroom pressure, and the feeling that you can never switch off. In the next episode, we're diving into the toll this job takes, why so many security leaders are walking away, and what life after being a CISO really looks like. Whether you're feeling the pressure or just planning your next move, you won't want to miss this one. Subscribe to the show wherever you consume podcasts and be on the lookout. It's going to be a good one.
And remember, security fuels innovation, complexity is the enemy, and collaboration is the way. Until next time.